Sometimes you just need to stop and get yourself under control. Hey, what's shaking, bacon? My name is Bruno Panucci. I hope you're doing well. So for those of you that don't know, I'm a registered massage therapist by trade. I've been doing it for 23 years. Now, the interesting thing about this career is you meet all sorts of people in all sorts of walks of life. And often I can make a real big difference in people's lives when it comes to their musculoskeletal injuries or problems. Sometimes it's just something as simple as an imbalance, a muscular imbalance, something that they just need to tweak and get some exercises and some stretches, and everything can sort of work itself out over time with the proper treatments. Now, every now and then I come across someone whose life is completely out of control. And some people, it's like myself right now, I have a window of my life that is completely out of control. I'm in a bit of a weird situation, but the whole point of being in those situations, unfortunately, is to learn how to dig yourself back out of those situations. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer to dig out of it than you expect. And other people keep themselves in these chronic situations, and it's their life. They've been in it for so long, they don't know how to stop it. They don't even realize they're in it. They are so deep into it. They think when they're trying to solve a problem, they're not actually getting to the problem, even though they think they are. They're dealing with the Band-Aids. And I came across this client today, and she seemed like a nice woman, but she also seemed like she was a whirlwind. I haven't seen a person come into my office like this in years. Her whole life is a whirlwind. Every area of her life is under stress. Can you relate? Everyone's been there, I think, at one point, but you hopefully get yourself out of that. If you have a world where your constant life is a struggle in every aspect of your life, you have to stop and wonder and question, okay, why is it I'm going through this? If you're going through something like this, it's one thing if I think if it can happen in the window of your life, or, lots of people have lots of areas of their life figured out, but they suck with finances, or they suck with relationships, or they suck with their diet. That's why lots of people come to this carnivore channel. We're having difficulty with their diet, and that affects the rest of our world. And this woman's diet has a direct effect on how she's living her life. Almost every area of her life she brought up was in turmoil. And it's not like a turmoil where she's going through a current situation or just a rough time. It's just the world she lives in. She has no idea. She's become so accustomed to it. She's like the proverbial frog that's in that water that's increasingly getting hot and doesn't realize that she's in boiling water. This isn't like some situation that she's been in for the last 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years. This is just her life. And every time she thinks she's dealing with a problem, she's actually just dealing with a symptom of the problem. Her real problem is stress and anxiety. Now, you and I know as carnivores, a lot of that comes from our food intake. There's the quality of life we live as far as our activity levels, and there's the quality of life we live when dealing with stress and stress management. But there's also the underlying problem to a lot of that stress and anxiety, and it's our diet. Because I like to use that analogy. When you're looking at a lake and the waters are really choppy because it's really windy out there and the waves are really turbulent, we need to calm down those waters. You have anxiety. Anxiety is your biggest issue right now. She had temporomandibular joint dysfunction, so she was grinding on her teeth. Her dentist was telling her she needed to spend $15,000 on dental work. And I can tell you now, for anyone out there, that does zip. If your dentist is telling you to get some dental work done to help correct a problem from you grinding your teeth and clenching your jaw, they're giving you a whole bunch of malarkey. The problem is stress and anxiety. That's why you're clenching your jaw to begin with. You can put a retainer in there so that you don't damage your teeth. That's the most a dentist can do for you. So what you need to do is manage that stress and anxiety. I use a couple different analogies to manage stress. One of them is somebody throwing eggs off of a roof, and your job is to be down there catching all the eggs, preventing them from breaking. And you can only keep that up for so long. And this woman thinks she can prevent all these eggs from breaking, not just by catching them, but maybe even making little contraptions so that they can all have soft landings. And meanwhile, they're all breaking, and she doesn't realize it. She's looking at the positive, the 1 or 2 that she has in her hands, but she's not realizing that she's missing or breaking all these other eggs as they're falling into her hands or to the ground. She doesn't realize the more time she's focusing on catching all these eggs, she's ignoring the fact that there's some dolt on the top of the roof throwing the eggs off. Now, sometimes we can be our own dolt, and we can cause our own problems problems in life, and that happens. And what you want to do is try and recognize and self-analyze if this is something that you can correct, or if it's something that you might need some help to deal with, or if there's someone else that's doing this to you and you need to address that issue. And sometimes that can happen in your personal life, your work life, all sorts of different areas. But what you have to do is stop that person from throwing so many damn eggs off the roof. And so I told her this. I said, does that make sense to you? And she said, yes, it does. And I said, everything you're doing isn't dealing with the person on the top of the roof. You're focused so much on catching those eggs at the bottom. You're not choosing to acknowledge the cause of the problem. And one of the biggest causes is your anxiety. And I said, how much coffee do you drink in a day? And she said, well, I have quite a bit, but I don't even really like coffee. And I said, okay, the first thing you're going to do is cut out your caffeine. And here's the thing. I truly want you to cut it out. I don't want you to replace it. I said, I want you to get rid of your stimulants in your diet. We're not even going to manage sugar at this point. I want you to get rid of any stimulant that you have. And she looked up at me like, do you understand what you're asking of me? And I was like, yeah, I understand exactly what I'm asking of you. You need to calm these waters, and you have a bit of an addictive personality, I think. And she was like, I absolutely do. And I said, yeah, you need to just stop, relax, and just hold tight and let that wind stop blowing so aggressively. Let that person slow down and tire themselves out, the person who's throwing the eggs off the roof. If you have anxiety, the worst thing you can be doing is giving yourself a stimulant. She goes, yeah, I take the caffeine to give me alertness throughout the day, but then I have trouble sleeping at night. So I said, let me get this straight. You're taking something that is making you alert, which is really not doing that much as far as making you alert goes. It's really just waking you up at best. And then what you're doing is you're also acknowledging and ignoring the fact at the same time that it's screwing with your sleep. You got to stop that. You're going to go through a withdrawal period for a while, but you have to stop stimulating yourself if you're dealing with anxiety. You have an anxiety issue, and it's the root of all your problems. You're overthinking all your problems. You're making decisions off your overthinking, and you're not dealing with these problems properly. She was using a little listening device in her ear that looked like a hearing aid, and it turned out it was just something that was putting white noise in her ear, sometimes music, sometimes just a sort of sound, just to distract herself, because she needs to calm down. So she's got a stress-related problem with her jaw, causing headaches. She has chronic anxiety that she's trying to distract herself with noise, and people can do that with music. She's choosing to walk around with this thing in her ear that makes it look like she's deaf. So there's a bit of an attention-seeking behavior there, right? Anyone else could just use a headphone in their ear, but this thing looked like it was an actual hearing aid. And so I thought at first this woman was hard of hearing. And this poor woman's whole life is out of balance. And I said, look, deal with the anxiety first. Get rid of the coffee. Simple as that. Get that caffeine out of your diet. You have to manage your stress. I said, what hobbies do you have? She had no hobbies. I said, well, do you read? And she said, yeah, actually, I do like to read. And I said, well, reading's not a good hobby. And I said, it's a fun thing to do. Don't get me wrong. And I know I'm going to offend some of you people out there, but hear me out. It's something that you're escaping with. Now, escaping with something isn't bad as long as it's constructful, as long as it's something that you're getting something out of. And yes, it can be beneficial in some ways, but you're sort of just trickle charging. It's like watching TV or scrolling. You're letting your mind just clear. You have to do something that you're getting better at. A hobby isn't just something that you're using to distract yourself. A hobby is something that you're doing to get better at something, whether it's a form of art, whether it's a sport, whether it's something that's mentally stimulating. You want to watch it because mentally stimulating can sometimes be mentally numbing things. Watching a movie and reading are basically the same thing as scrolling. You're not as mentally stimulated as you think. You don't feel a sense of reward typically afterwards. Maybe if you're learning something. I'm going to get into this in a different video about managing stress. I made an old one back in at video 30 or something like that about managing stress. What I want you to do is focus on something that's artistically upbuilding, physically upbuilding, as something that's mentally upbuilding. So learning is mentally upbuilding. Reading isn't always learning. And that's why learning isn't the best thing to do as a hobby. You're not physically stimulated. You're not really artistically stimulated. So you need to hit these areas of your mind. And I said, before you start getting into those hobbies, let's relax a little bit. You need to learn to stop winding yourself up because you're like a whirlwind. She was really soaking it up. She's like, you should be a life coach. I'm like, yeah. But she's like, no, seriously, you should be a life coach. And I was like, look, this is simple. I said, look, this is simple. You're just overthinking this situation. You need to calm your mind. You got to stop constantly stimulating yourself with the wrong things. You need to learn how to relax and get used to your calm thoughts. It's going to take you a while to do that. And the first thing you can do to help manage your anxiety is get rid of stimulants. You need hobbies that are relaxing. Do you do adult coloring? And she was like, yeah, actually I did that years ago. I said, take it back up. Take up an old hobby or pick up a new hobby that you can learn. Now, she was really excited about all this information and she was looking forward to putting it into practice. And I said to her, like, look, you have to stop negotiating, because every time I talked to her about cutting out caffeine, she was trying to think of other ways she can get caffeine in her diet. And I said, look, just go down to water. You're overcomplicating the situation. Stick with water. And she was like, okay, what if I have a decaffeinated coffee? And I looked at her and I was like, you're negotiating. I said, we just talked about this. You got to go down to just water, just for a while, water only. That's it. She's like, okay. And I said, that doesn't mean you can still have decaffeinated pop and decaffeinated tea and all these other things. I said, you are going to go down to just water. You might, if you want, have white tea. Now, that is known for not having any caffeine in it. That's something that's still a little bit flavored. You can have some flavored waters as long as it's not sweetened with any sort of artificial flavoring. But you can have like a flavored Perrier or flavored bubbly water as long as there's no artificial sweeteners in there. And I said, just stick with water. You can have spring water, you can have tap water, you can have reverse osmosis water. Find a water you like, have a bit of variety in there, and just learn to get used to water. You're going to feel like crap for the first week or two as you go through withdrawals, but you'll eventually feel better. I don't want you to do too much all at once because it's going to be less sincere. So right now, focus on cutting out caffeine. The next time I see you will be the next thing that we can add to your list of things to do or not do. Right now, the only thing you have to do is take something out of your schedule. That should be an easy thing to do. I'm not asking you to add something to your schedule. I'm asking you to take something out of your schedule, and that's your caffeine. Now stop putting a time aside for caffeine and start just drinking water. So how does all this relate to carnivore? Well, when you're doing a carnivore diet, what happens is there's a lot of anxiety and addictions, and everyone has their own addictions. And she still has to work on her sugar and carbohydrate addiction because she has an issue pretty bad. And that's something she's going to deal with a little bit later. But right now, we need to focus on our addictions and distractions from our addictions. Now, Kelly Hogan talks about how you want to replace an addiction with a good positive thing. Like, for example, if you're used to having junk food and you're trying to get rid of having junk food, replace that habit of junk food with something positive, like a little workout or something healthy that you can eat. And then you're rewarding your dopamine receptors in your brain with something that's a substitute. And eventually your body's going to start wanting to have that substitute instead of the original thing. So it's kind of like tricking your brain. And that's what this woman needs to do. We need to learn from each other's examples, both good and bad. And right now, when it comes to being a carnivore, you need to understand if you're dealing with an addiction or not. And if you are, you got to stop negotiating. I don't care if it's your birthday. I don't care if it's Christmas. I don't care if it's your 4-year-old saying, please eat this. I know you'll love it. That doesn't matter. It's a reason that you're giving in and craving to an addiction. You have to stop with the addictive behavior, and you have to calm yourself first before you can start dealing with that. And in this woman's case, it was managing her anxiety, getting rid of stimulants out of her diet. And maybe for you, it might be something else. Maybe for you, it's sugar. And she admitted she had an addiction to sugar. And I was like, that's something we can talk about later. But for right now, just worry about getting rid of these stimulants because you're all over the map. And she seemed really receptive, and she was really eager to come back and talk about her next update. And I said, don't wait till tomorrow. Don't wait till Monday. Don't wait till the beginning of next month. Don't wait till January 1st. Your last sip of coffee was your last sip of coffee. You've already had it. It's an addictive thinking that always wants to push it off to a start date. You have to stop that thinking. If this is you with carbohydrates and sugar, you have to acknowledge, you have to stop that line of thinking. You're not going to start fresh tomorrow. You're not going to start fresh at the beginning of the next week. You're not going to start fresh at the beginning of next month. You're starting fresh now.